So yeah, I've been interested in insects for about 6 years. I started by photographing bumblebees, and then while I was doing that, I noticed all of these really interesting and varied flies that were also hanging around on flowers as well. And I realized that there were lots of them and that they had really interesting patterns and very varied lifestyles. And also, which is a big bonus, they're quite easy to identify compared to a lot of other insects. So if you're ever looking to get into recording insects, hoverflies are a really good place to start. The species you can see I've got here, I put there because I really like the scientific name of it, Chrysotoxum festivum, because it sounds like a party, doesn't it? And I think this hoverfly is one of certainly the more decorative ones. And I feel like, you know, it's kind of dressed ready for attending a party, really. That's my contact email there. So I work for EcoRecord, which is based with the Wildlife Trust. And EcoRecord is the local environmental record centre for Birmingham and the Black Country. We basically manage information about the species, habitats and sites of Birmingham and the Black Country. And we're one of many, many record centres, each covering a discrete geographical area of the UK. So we collect and manage species records. So any species you see in Birmingham and the Black Country, we're interested in hearing about because it all adds to our knowledge of what lives where, what's declining, what's being lost. And it tells us about what sites are important, what sites we should be trying to help get protected, where we need to create habitats and where we need to help manage habitats to stop them from being lost. So EcoRecord collects and manages information about all of that kind of thing, and we provide that to people who research and manage the habitats of Birmingham and the Black Country. So we're based at the Wildlife Trust, who are a local charity who are working for nature's recovery. Obviously, the focus is quite urban, and it's about connecting people to wild spaces and bringing wildlife into people's lives, and also trying to help in nature's recovery throughout the urban area and create better connections between the sites that we have. One of the pictures you can see there is a meadow that was created in the central reservation of Bristol Street. Another picture is a stream that the Wildlife Trust have helped to clean up in Deersleep Wood. The Wildlife Trust manages 6 nature reserves dotted across Birmingham and the Black Country. These are all open for anyone to visit, and I've been to 4 of them and I love them. I'm actually currently doing a survey of Deersleep Wood, of the invertebrates there, so I'll be writing a report about that soon. There's also 2 education centres as well. There's a Centre of the Earth in Winston Green and Eco Park in Small Heath, where the Trust hold education days, volunteer days, to help, again, connect the local community to the wildlife in those areas. So now we come to the actual body of the talk. The introductions to me is over, and now we're going to be introducing hoverflies. Now you can see straight away from these images here, these are just the tip of the iceberg, really, in terms of the hoverflies that we have in the UK, even in Birmingham and the Black Country. And we're going to be introducing a few of these as part of this talk, although it's not really going to be an ID kind of introduction. There's lots of books to help that. It's more going to talk about the various lifestyles and the importance of hoverflies. So the fact you're here means that I guess you probably know a little bit about hoverflies are, and you want to learn a bit more. the things that people typically know about hoverflies is that they're flies and they hover. It's quite obvious from the name. You might know that they're sort of striped, black and yellow stripy. They look a little bit like wasps. You might know that they like to sit around on flowers. And you might know that they're known as the gardener's friend because they are known to eat aphids. Well, all of these statements are true. The actual truth is a lot more nuanced and a lot more complex than that. And this talk is going to be based around these 4 statements. And I'm going to explore these in a bit more detail just to see how true they are and delve into a bit more of the diversity of what hoverflies are doing, what they want, where they are, all of those things. I mean, to me, I find they're fascinating, mostly because they're so easy to find. I mean, like even today, it's been relatively cold, but there's been some sunny spells, and I can almost guarantee you could go out into your garden and see at least one species of hoverfly, even at this time of year. So in terms of the amount of effort you need to make to find them, they're quite an easy one. Not like dragonflies where you have to go and find a pond and wait till a certain time of year. Hoverflies, they're just there all the time. So I think we need to start out by actually describing what a hoverfly is. So hoverflies belong to the insect order Diptera, which means true flies. And basically this means it has 2 wings. It comes from the Greek di, 2, and tura, wings. Now, throughout this presentation, my pronunciation of scientific Greek and Latin is going to be incredibly shaky. I do apologize for that, but it's not often I meet up with other hoverfly enthusiasts and discuss these things out loud. So we'll just bear with me on that. So flies have 2 wings, and you might not realize this, but actually many other types of insects actually have 4 wings. Now, flies have evolved. Their hind pair of wings have actually evolved into these small club-shaped appendages, which I've circled here on this picture to the right of the screen. Now, these are called halteres, and these help to control flight. These are like almost like a little bit like a gyroscope in a way. And this is one of the reasons why hoverflies in particular can hover so well. Other fly features, and this is quite obvious. The body is made of 3 main parts. You've got the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. It's an insect, so it's got 6 legs as well. And if we look at the head, you'll notice it's got a pair of large eyes, a pair of kind of clubbed antennae, and the mouth is on the underside. It's kind of like a sucking tube, which is similar to most other flies. You can see in profile, the actual face looks a little bit like a nose and mouth as well, which some of the hoverflies have very distinctive faces as well. As well as the 2 main eyes, there's also 3 simple eyes on the head as well. And a lot of these features are quite useful for helping to identify certain species of hoverfly. So the name of hoverflies in scientific terms is Surfidae, which I did try to look up, and it basically means flying ant or something like that. It's not very exciting. But basically, if you're trying to work out what a hoverfly is compared to other flies, they're fairly compact. So they don't have like long legs or long bodies like, say, crane flies or anything like that. They're often yellow and black, which does help to identify them, but they're never bright blue or green, which helps to identify them from other things like green bottle, blue bottle, and soldier flies and things like that. Quite often they're furry in the same way that a bumblebee is, but they're never bristly like houseflies. And if we want to get really technical, they're the only fly that has this spurious vein, which I've marked here in red on this image, although they're not normally red. So this is like an additional kind of almost brace across the other veins in the wings. Again, this kind of also probably helps in some way with the flying ability of the hoverflies. There are lots of other flies that might look a bit like hoverflies, and all of these are obviously incredibly interesting as well, and probably the topic for a future talk. But there's some examples here. There's soldier flies. These first two, particularly the first one, you might think that is a hoverfly, but you can see it looks very flat, and hoverflies tend not to be flat like that. The third one along is a conopid fly, a four-banded wasp grabber. This one's called. There's great names. These ones tend to grab wasps, and I think from memory they lay grab bees and they lay eggs inside them. I think it's pretty gruesome, but the flies look fantastic. And another one you're going to see a lot at the moment are these dark-edged bee flies, which are in the bee fly family, which tend to hover around the nests of solitary bees and try to flick their eggs inside there. So obviously the weather's gone a bit colder at the moment, but as soon as it warms up again, you're going to see absolutely loads of these buzzing around. These are really common. And once you see them, you'll see them everywhere. So hoverflies, there's 6,000 species of them worldwide, and 283 have been recorded in the UK. They do often say that on average, one new species gets added a year in the UK. This is partly due to new species recording or new DNA analysis, realizing that one species might actually be 3 different species. Actually, like, even though it's a small area and it's quite urban, we've had 176 of these recorded in Birmingham and the Black Country. This kind of, in a way, represents the diversity of the habitats we've got, and also the fact that a lot of hoverflies are quite broad, really, in their habitats requirements. And it also represents the fact we've had a lot of very expert recorders over the years recording them. Otherwise, we wouldn't know this. You'll see that throughout this presentation, I will be using scientific names. That's because most hoverflies don't actually have widely accepted common names. But the purposes of this talk, and because this is an introduction, I'll be using the common names that Stephen Falk has assigned to hoverflies on his really good Flickr page. And it's really it really made me laugh to learn some of these, because some of those are fantastic names. You will see this is a marmalade fly here. This is probably the most common hoverfly, so this is one you probably will recognize, and you can always recognize this because it looks like it's got mustaches on its back. It's called marmalade fly because it's the color is like marmalade, basically. So we've done the fact they hover. Now we're going to talk about the fact they're black and yellow. Now, hoverflies are one of the best mimics in the insect world. They resemble bees and wasps, not only in their shape, but also the way they move. Now, the recent paper that looked at drone flies and bees, and they found out that they mimic bees in terms of their behavior more than any other insect. Now, the reason they do this is thought to be in order to fool potential predators. So if you see something that looks like it might be dangerous, it might be stinging, it might not taste nice, then you tend to avoid it. So this kind of mimicry is known as Batesian mimicry, where something that's essentially harmless is pretending to be something more harmful in order to stop things from eating it. Now, this is not 100% successful. There's birds are probably about as good as humans are at telling hoverflies apart from bees, but as we'll probably find out later on in this talk, even humans aren't that great at telling the difference. And the fact that it looks a little bit like a wasp might make the bird look twice, and by that point, the hoverflies escaped. So that could be where the benefit comes from. And some of them are much better at mimicry than others. Some of them you think, what is that meant to even look like? We're going to look at some examples here. So this is a very common one here in this picture, this hoverfly. This is an Eristalis pertinax, which are the tapered dronefly. Now you'll see loads of these probably later on in the year. And you can see on the left-hand side, we've got a Western honeybee. Now, at first glance, a lot of people might get confused with these and think that it is actually a honeybee. And there's some key things here that will tell you whether something is a bee or whether it's a hoverfly. If you look at the picture of the bee, you can see that it's got quite oval eyes. The antennae are much longer and narrower. And something that's a lot less obvious when you're looking at bees is the fact they actually have 4 wings and not 2. Whereas with the hoverfly, they've got big eyes, short clubbed antennae, and they've just got 2 wings. Now, even, you know, with the experience I've got, I kind of still get confused by them, and I'm sure you will too. And some of them are a lot more convincing than others. And as we see here, humans can get confused as well. The hoverflies are often in the news for the wrong reasons. And so here we have a copy of the Welsh beekeeper, and you might spot straight away that creature on there has got large eyes, and it's clearly not a honeybee. So even the beekeepers can get confused. Buzz about bees. Again, we've got a hoverfly here they've used as a picture. This is one of my favorite hoverfly, my favorite hobby, just spotting these mistakes that people make. Here's a bottle of honey, which has got a hoverfly on there. You can see the big eyes, the clubbed antennae. Here's a story about Jeremy Clarkson, who's reveals he was stung by a bee. And if you can spot this carefully, that this picture here is clearly a hoverfly and not a bee. So you'll probably start to see a lot of these examples where even humans, if they're not paying attention or they don't have that much knowledge about hoverflies and bees, they will easily get them mixed up. There's about 10 species of hoverfly that are quite decent bumblebee mimics. And all of these pictures along the bottom here, this is all the same species of hoverfly. So this is a hoverfly called the Narcissus fly, Merodon equestris, and that has different color forms, which actually matches different bumblebee species. This is quite an interesting species. This is one that its larvae bury into the bulbs of various, mainly daffodils. So this one is definitely not the gardener's friend. And it makes a really high-pitched noise as well. That's one of the best ways you can identify. If you see a bee flying around and it sounds horrible, then it's probably one of these. But you can see it's replicating the common carder bee on the left, early bumblebee, tree bumblebee, and buff-tailed bumblebee, if we're being a bit generous. Here's some other bumblebee mimics we've got. Furry dronefly here. For some reason, a lot of these pictures are on thistles, which are one of the most favoured flowers of hoverflies. The middle one here, we've got a bumblebee hoverfly. So just moving the zoom controls out the way there. And this is one of the biggest bumblebee mimics. These are really impressive when you see these. And we've got a Calosia illustrata here as well. But there are other species as well. These are the most common ones, and these are ones which are relatively common in Birmingham and the Black Country. So if you keep your eyes out, there's a good chance you will see these species. And these are relatively easy to identify once you get your eye in. So now we come on to the ones that pretend to be wasps. So along the left-hand side, we've actually got the pictures of the wasps that these ones are possibly trying to approximate. So we've got our old friend here we saw earlier, Chrysotoxum festivum, the hook-barred spearhorn, that looks kind of like a Saxon wasp, which is a social wasp if you kind of use your imagination a little bit. In the middle, we've got a two-banded spearhorn, which looks kind of like a mason wasp with its kind of black section in the middle. And then we've got the northern spearhorn on the right-hand side, which is a lot more yellow. And this does replicate the our more common sort of social wasps there. And the thing that makes these such good mimics of wasps is you notice the antennae, rather than being short and clubbed, these have got much longer antennae, which makes them look a lot more wasp-like, which makes it much easier to fool people. And these are, so we're on to the big ones now. So in the Volucella genus, we've got hoverflies that mimic hornets. So we've got the hornet on the left-hand side here, and we've got the hornet plumehorn here in the middle. Now, this is one of the UK's largest flies, and it's a relatively recent arrival to Birmingham and the Black Country. This is one of those species that has, its range has really moved northwards over the past sort of 20 years or so. So 20 years ago, you wouldn't see this one here. You would probably only see it in southern England. And the same really with the wasp plumehorn as well. So these kind of represent just how many changes you can see in the distribution of insects. And this is thought to be probably in response to climate change. So you can see the ranges of lots of different insect species are shifting even within a few years, and you start to see like totally different species in a certain area. In case you're interested, the largest fly species in the UK is a species of horsefly. I think it's the greater horsefly, which thankfully we don't see too often, because horseflies scare me a bit. They've got beautiful eyes, but they're quite scary. These Volucellas, you'll see them a lot on things like Buddleia, sort of later in the year. So in August and September, you're more likely to see these ones. Those are ones to look out, certainly to look out for. And then we've got sawfly mimics. Now, this is quite interesting because sawflies are related to bees and wasps. They're a bit more of a primitive version of them, but they actually can't sting themselves. But a lot of them have actually evolved to look a bit like bees and wasps in their own form of mimicry. So the fact that the hoverfly is copying something that's already harmless but mimicking something else means we're getting 2 degrees of mimicry away here. So you've got the actual sawflies again down the left, and these are the ones which I found whose colours kind of match these hoverflies. Now these ones in the Xylota genus are quite interesting because these ones don't actually really visit flowers that much. What they do, they kind of scoot around side to side on leaves, eating honeydew that's produced by aphids and other like pollen granules that have happened to land on the leaf. So even the way they move, it's very kind of wasp-like. So these are ones to kind of spot sort of moving around on vegetation. And then we've got this crimson belted hoverfly as well here that looks a lot like this sawfly, which is called Macrophyta annulata there at the bottom. So we've done mimicry, and now I wanted to talk about pollination. So we see hoverflies sitting around on flowers a lot. And the fact is, when we think about pollinators, we do normally think about honeybees and other types of bees as well, but there are a lot of pollinators outside of those groups as well. I mean, not even just insects. I mean, bats are pollinators. Some mammals could be considered as pollinators, but hoverflies are particularly important ones. They visit flowers for energy from nectar and from the protein-rich pollen, which is essential for them to be able to develop eggs. And because they're often furry as well, in the same way as bees, the pollen grains actually stick to them. So they're carrying them from flower to flowers, obviously then helping in the pollination process. They're also, because there's lots of them as well, when you see on a hot day, you might see absolutely lots of hoverflies, although they're not quite as furry as bees because there's so many of them. They're, obviously that makes them very important pollinator just from sheer numbers. And their behavior is also different to bees, because unlike social bees, which might have a nest and be going to and from the nest, because hoverflies aren't tied to a nest, they're traveling over much larger distances, sort of carrying pollen potentially much further. You even get hoverflies that migrate all the way from Europe as well. So can be much longer distances involved. This hoverfly here, shown here, you can see the pollen actually attached to the fur and on the eyes there. This is a very common one. This is actually on ivy, which is a really good flower for hoverflies. If you look at any ivy in September, you'll see it's absolutely covered in bees and hoverflies, making it a really important late autumn plant. Most hoverflies, they're not as specialized as bees in terms of collecting pollen. So they tend to stick to quite simple flowers, sort of flat flowers where they can easily get to the pollen. But there are a couple of species that have evolved quite long faces, and these are two really good examples. So you've got this, the Ringia and Anasimaya ones, which have evolved long faces so they can reach flowers such as red campion. And I love the common name that's been given to this one here, the snouted duck fly. And you can see its face does look a bit like a duck. And this other one here, the common snout as well. It's they almost look comical. These ones are kind of a wetland specialists in a way, and these are probably some of the species that will be affected most by climate change, with a lot of habitats sort of drying out, which makes things like pond creation like really important for these kind of species. Already we've seen declines in numbers of these kind of species, and we think that is because of climate change. So in terms of the flowers that you're going to see hoverflies at, they're quite broad, but they do tend to favour certain flowers. And hogweed is a fantastic one for hoverflies. It smells horrible. That's where it gets its name. It smells like pigs. But you know, you see a hogweed plant, and there'll often be, you know, up to 6 species of hoverfly on one flower, all jostling for the pollen there. Wild carrot is another good one, and obviously earlier in the year, cow parsley as well. Also members of the daisy family, thistles, knapweeds and yarrows, they love all of these kind of things. You know, thistles, we see thistles as being something bad, but they're fantastic for pollinators. And knapweeds as well, like in meadows, you know, if you've got a meadow full of knapweed, it's going to be absolutely buzzing with life. The leafcutter bees love knapweed as well. And also devil's bit scabious, which is one of my favorite, which is shown in the bottom right-hand corner here. And one of my favorite hoverflies is on it as well. So that's a double whammy of joy for me when I saw that. I mean, going through the species we've got here, we've got, you'll notice we've got one called the Batman hoverfly. And this is named because it's got a bat symbol on its back, if you kind of use your imagination a bit. This is a great one for pollinating as well, because it's got a line of hairs all around it. And in this picture, I think it's on a hogweed, which is one of its favorites. In the middle, we've got buttercup blacklet. Now, the Calosia ones, you do tend to see them on buttercups a lot. So if you see a meadow full of buttercups in sort of mid-spring, you're probably going to see lots of black flies on them, and a lot of these will be hoverflies, and most of them will be these Calosias. This particular one, its larvae lives in the roots of the buttercup, and it emerges, and then it actually feeds on the flower. And yeah, finally we've got this stripe-backed fleckwing. Again, great name. Dasysurfus albistriatus, which has got the 2 stripes on its back. Don't worry, there's not going to be a quiz on all of these species, and this is not meant to be an ID thing, but this is just to give an idea of the variety of hoverfly out there. So that's pollination, but really the adult hoverfly that we kind of picture, that only exists for like 3 weeks in the year. Most of the rest of the year, it's actually existing in larval form. So when we think of what is the hoverfly, really we should be thinking about the stage it spends most of its life in. And this is where hoverflies are really varied in terms of how their lifestyles exist. if we look at actually what they look like, they're similar to other flies. They're quite basic. They don't have legs. They don't have a head. They're wider at the back, and they have a single tube at the back for breathing. You can see a couple of examples here. They don't look that pretty, to be honest. Some of them have actually evolved to look a bit like bird droppings, like similar to some of the caterpillars. But they do live in very different habitats. Now, the ones you might know about are the aphid eaters. Now, these are known as the gardener's friends. They will live on leaves, and they will be eating voraciously aphids. Now, only about 40% of British species are actually predators of this type, and they don't even just focus on aphids. Some of them include some of the soft-bodied insects, like some of the plant lice or some of the micro moth larvae as well. So any kind of small soft-bodied insect is game, really. They can't see, so they're basically relying on a series of chemical signals and touch to find their prey. And when they do find an aphid, they use their long, thin mouth hooks to pierce the skin of it and suck out the contents. So it's quite gruesome, really. But if you ever see them, you might see them basically lifting up the aphid to feed on them. And the reason this is because aphids do release an alarm pheromone to warn the rest of the colony. And by lifting them up, it means that the pheromone isn't reaching the others to spread the warning. So this is something to think quite interesting to look out for. So some of the larvae feed on plants. I did mention Merodon equestris earlier, the narcissus fly, which whose larvae tunnel in daffodils and other bulbs, which are not so welcome by gardeners. But another species that you might see, particularly if you're in a woodland or streamside that's got lots of wild garlic, is the Ramson's hoverfly. Again, we don't have many records of this so far, but it's an easy one to identify, and it's never found that far from wild garlic. And its larvae basically mine the bulbs, and then the adult feeds on the flowers. And you can see it's quite an attractive sort of grey and black thing there. So that's the Ramson's hoverfly, Porta venia maculata, if we're going to attempt some scientific Latin. There are some other species as well, like the Calosias that I mentioned, that do mine into plants as well. A lot of them mine into thistles, and some people do search for the larvae by cutting open thistles stems to find them. Some of the species like to feed on dead or dying organic material. So they're filter feeders. So they kind of suck in the microorganisms that feed on this organic material, and they're found in sort of wetland kind of conditions, and also associated with trees. But this is why trees are so important for not just hoverflies, but lots of insects, and particularly dead and dying trees and veteran trees, because they have all of these features that insects are attracted to and are just really valuable habitats. Things like saprons, which occur where is a tree is damaged, and you kind of like see a sticky stream of substance sort of coming out, or rotting woods, and rot holes, which are great. This is where like a branch breaks off and sort of dry or wet rock gets in, and other organic materials accumulate, and then this wet kind of organic soup is just an ideal habitat for hoverflies. We've got a couple of species here. This one here, for common copperback, which is quite a cool looking one, that's associated with saprons, and this one at the bottom, the variable bear hoverfly. You'll often see, if you see a bumblebee-like thing flying around the base of a tree looking for somewhere to lay its eggs, it's worth checking to see if it's one of these, because the female tends to be flying around trees. Also, some hoverfly species do like to live in ponds and ditches. And the reason that they can do that is that their larva has evolved this very long breathing tube, which can have dipped out of the water in order to breathe. And it's feeding on the microorganisms that are kind of decaying the things, say, in the pond. So I guess there's an argument here, like people who absolutely get all of the leaves out of a pond that fall in there, maybe leaving some of that material in there because things like these hoverflies will be depending on that. This is a hoverfly here that you might have seen. This is a tiger hoverfly, which is also known as the footballer because of its striped jersey it's wearing. I guess if you imagine like the Newcastle strip, but yellow instead of the white, you kind of get the idea here. So this is one, I dug a pond in my garden last year, and there were about 5 of these all flying around the pond for at least 3 months, waiting for females to land and lay their eggs. So this is one to look out for, an easy one to spot. They also like to live in the nests of other insects. So ants' nests in particular are quite interesting for hoverflies. There's some root aphids that are attended by ants that are actually within the nests. And no one knows whether how they actually survive, because normally ants will attack anything that's attacking the aphids that they're sort of farming. So there's a lot of mystery around this one. And it's not actually known whether the adult hoverfly actually needs to enter the nest in order to lay eggs or not. There's still lots of questions we have around the behavior of some of these. That's that species shown at the top, the superb anthill hoverfly. Also, hoverflies larvae also use the nests of wasps and bees as well, particularly the volucella ones, which we saw earlier, the hornet mimics, and also the bumblebee mimic as well. And in this case, the female actually does fly into the nest to lay their eggs. And obviously, they often get attacked. There's been studies where the bumblebee hoverfly has been attacked by bumblebees, and as a response, it lays its eggs immediately. And when the eggs hatch, the larvae basically feed on anything that falls to the bottom of the nest, and that can include like the dead workers, dead larvae, dropped food, and larvae of other insects as well. So they basically scavenge around at the bottom of these nests, such as this other one, this pied plumehorn, Volucella pellicens, which is another very common and very large species that you'll see with a very orange face. So, okay, so that's the different life cycles. So if we want to go and find some hoverflies, where are we going to look? Like I said, on any warm day, really, between March and October, you're probably very likely to see them. The number of species you see will depend on the variety of habitats there. Obviously, if you're at a nature reserve and you've got ponds, you've got meadows, you've got nice woodland, you've got hedges, you're going to see more hoverflies than if you've just got a woodland. But the best place is to look anything with lots of flowers. So ancient woodlands sort of around this time of year, or maybe in about a month's time when it warms up a bit, or sort of wildflower meadows are both fantastic for hoverflies. This picture I took here is at Highbury Park, and you can see all of the knapweed on this particular bit, and this was absolutely swarming with hoverflies. They like the sun, so if you look for south-facing sunlit areas such as woodland glades, hedges, and around ponds, you'll see them basking on leaves as well. And often this is sometimes the easiest way to photograph them because they stay still, as opposed to on hot sunny days when they're zipping around like really fast around flowers. And gardens are fantastic for spotting them as well, because gardens tend to have quite a large range of different flowers and habitats and ecological niches for quite a small space. And particularly if you've got flowers in your garden that flower throughout the year, this is really a fantastic resource for hoverflies. There was someone who basically studied them in their garden over an 8-year period, and they managed to record 85 different species just in one suburban garden. And obviously there's lots of things you can do in your garden to make it even more attractive to not just hoverflies, but other insects as well, such as building ponds, having trees, piles of woods, compost heaps, and just a really good range of different types of flowers as well. And think about hoverflies, and they don't necessarily have to have native wildflowers. They're not that fussy really, so they're happy to forage on anything that's vaguely related, as long as they can actually get to the pollen. They don't seem to mind that much. a great thing about hoverflies is that there's a lot of different species, and quite a few of them can actually be identified from taking a photograph of them, unlike a lot of other insects, which you have to end up with dissecting their genitalia and that kind of thing. So this is a good species group to start off with. If you're careful, you can get surprisingly close to them without scaring them away. And if you're taking photos, take several different photos of different angles, try and get a picture of its back from above, showing the wings, showing its face and legs, because depending on the species, this might be the key features that you need to identify them from. You can post your photos using the iNaturalist app, which has got recognition software, which will analyze it and it will help to suggest a species. And when you upload it, you've got people who will also take a look and maybe help you to suggest what it could be. There's also a really useful Facebook group called UK Hoverflies, which if you join there and post your pictures, people will help you to identify what you've seen as well. So there's lots of people out there lots of experts out there who can help you to identify sort of hoverflies from pictures. There's some useful other resources as well. There's a fantastic book, and this is to me the Hoverfly Bible, called Britain's Hoverflies. This is part of the Wild Guide series, and that's got lots of photos in. That's a guide to all of the most commonly recorded ones. So I can't really recommend that book enough. That's by Stuart Ball and Roger Morris. They're from the Hoverfly Recording Scheme, who've also got a very good website. This map is taken from there. This map is showing the number of species recorded in each 10 kilometre square, I think. And you can see that Birmingham and the Black Country in the middle is quite, it comes out quite well actually here, probably because of the variety of habitats we've got, combined with the number of people who are out there looking for hoverflies. There's also good websites with sort of galleries of the different species. There's Nature Spot, and there's also Stephen Fawkes's Flickr page as well, which has got really good descriptions of all of the species, as well as some of the common names which I've been using in this presentation. So if you identify it, then what do you do then? How can you make that information useful? Well, as I said, I work for EcoRecord, and we collect information on species records. And a species record is basically 4 main elements: who saw it, what was seen, where it was, and when it was seen. And basically this is a burst of information about an encounter with a living organism. And this is important because we can't protect what we don't know. So the nature conservation actions we take is based on the data we have, based on the evidence we have. And the more we know, the better, really, especially about the presence of rare and protected species, but also trends such as what's increasing, what's decreasing. That allows us to work with people such as Birmingham City Council and the other local authorities to help to make sure that sites are protected and that appropriate legislation is in place to come up with plans to protect various species. Hoverflies in particular are important because they're quite sensitive. Indicators of the health of our environment is they're quite short-lived, fast breeding. So that means that they show rapid changes. And this could be as a response to changes in habitats, fragmentation, changes in climate. So there could be all kinds of change that hoverfly information is telling us. There's also a species atlas that we produced recently, which looks at all of the species recorded in the UK, which has distribution maps. This is on the EcoRecord website, and you can download that for free. But at some point we will be doing this again. So any species that you do gather will help us to update this atlas with new information about what species we have in our area and where they are. There's various ways you can send records to EcoRecord. There's via social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter. We've got a website with a form. There's iNaturalist, iRecord, and you can drop us an email, or even the old-fashioned way of writing us a letter and posting it to us. So there's various ways you can send us records, and these will all get to us. at some point. And if you do feel inspired to do some hoverfly recording, then this could be the perfect opportunity to do it. From the 29th of April to 2nd of May, Birmingham and the Black Country is taking part in the City Nature Challenge. And the aim of this is over the 4 days to try to record as many different species and as much wildlife as possible to see how we compare against 450 other city areas around the world, including 13 others from the UK. This will be our 3rd time taking part in it, and we tend to do quite well. It's always interesting to just see how many species we can record over 4 days, and that's not just hoverflies, that's anything. That's mosses, birds, you know, worms, that's anything. So that could be a good opportunity to give biological recording a go. And taking part is easy. You download the iNaturalist app, take photos and upload those. You can also, I've talked about things you can do in your garden for insects. There's a free downloadable action for insect guide from the Wildlife Trust website via that link there, which tells you, which has tips on insect-friendly gardening and other small actions that can make a big difference. Just quickly to say that the Wildlife Trust is a membership organisation, and a lot of the work we do wouldn't be possible without our members, and there's lots of benefits from joining. You get the magazines, you get Wildlife Watch membership, and you get access to all of the events that the Wildlife Trust has on. And you can find them on social media via all of these handles here. On YouTube now, this video might get posted to YouTube at some point. So if you need to go back and refresh your knowledge on what I've told you today about hoverflies, which was a lot, you can go there. And that's it. That is the end of my talk on hoverflies.